Hi, everyone. On today's episode of NEWFORUM, and in the context of the Identity Hackathon, I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Sena, co-founder of 3Box Labs behind the Ceramic Network, bringing data composability, and Irene Wu, head of strategy at Layer Zero, the Omnichain Interoperability Protocol. So identity and interoperability can be scary words to understand and to say, but we're in the best hands to decipher what they mean and what is at stake for Web3 and the crypto space. So Irene and Michael, welcome, and let's start if you're ready. So when it comes to kind of identity and interoperability, in previous panels, the word that comes back a lot is puzzle or the holy grail of use cases. I wanted to briefly have as an intro, kind of what is your take when you hear the word either identity or interoperability? How, through the lens of your experiences and projects, how would you briefly define it? And you'll have more occasions to go more in depth after. So if you can just give your brief overview of what comes to mind, basically.
Yeah, I'm happy to begin here. Interoperability is certainly not a new problem. In the space of blockchain right now, technology, interoperability is incredibly important, but with the advent of the internet, interoperability was also a problem that needed to be solved. And the way I define it is interoperability is the ability for different systems to exchange and have meaning with different sources of information. And so with omnichain interoperability, and specifically how we constructed Layer Zero, we set out to enable communication between smart contracts on different chains and essentially arbitrary contract invocation with a bytes array. So the ability to send packets of information between contracts on disparate systems.
Michael, when you think of identity or interoperability, what comes to mind, either technical definition or just random thoughts that popped in your mind?
I guess I'll take the concept of identity here, although they are very sort of interrelated. I think of, an identity is sort of the account or let's say it's a key pair or whatever you can imagine it to be, something that enables a user to have sovereignty over some account. But, identity is useful in the context of a system, right? And so you can think of, you have a decentralized identity on Ethereum, and it gives you capabilities and permissions within the Ethereum ecosystem. And likewise, you might have accounts and identities in different networks that give you permissions in those networks. But when I think about the intersection of identity and interoperability, I think of sort of asking that question of how do we integrate identities across disparate systems? How can I represent the same actor on system A and B and sort of provide that unified user experience so I don't feel the silos between Ethereum and Solana, for example. It sort of feels like one unified web.
How can we build these standards? When you look at Web2, there are standards, even if you look at phone carriers and understanding an iPhone, etc. So Irene, how do you see us building the standards? Who will be building these standards for Web3 and also linking it to Web2? And how will they do it?
Yeah, we at Layer Zero have built certain omnichain standards based on the experiences of developers that have reached out with really urgent problems that they've run into. So for example, there were many well-funded games and NFT projects that were built within the Terra Luna ecosystem. And after that entire ecosystem collapsed overnight, many of these projects were essentially stranded. They had bet the success of their project on one chain, which for a long time was the way that we built projects. We chose one chain, say Solana, and built a DEX there, and it was a Solana-based DEX. Or we chose Polygon and built a game there, and it was a Polygon-based game. But how would you future-proof a project that is dependent on a single chain and its creator company for its liveness? And that essentially led us to creating the OFT and ONFT standards, omnichain fungible token and omnichain non-fungible token, which are ways to launch tokens that natively exist on multiple chains or to convert single chain NFTs or fungible tokens into omni-chain ones, or ones that can seamlessly transfer between chains. And you ask who should be making these? I think developers should be making them, and there should be working groups. So in our case, when we were creating these, there was a small contingent of developers that we went back to time and time again for their feedback. And then when we published these as open source GitHub repos, there were grassroots teams that started experimenting with them, and that informed version 2 of many of these standards. Right now, we're part of the working group for ERC 6551, and it's been really cool to see disparate engineering functions from different groups come together and actually create some coordinated product effort. I think it's across like 6 different teams right now.
Super cool. Michael, if you want to reply to this, do you agree on the take that it's like mainly developers that are behind these standards? You know, when we talk about the Web3 ecosystem, we usually say it's kind of fragmented. So, you know, there's lots of, I mean, of course, I don't want to minimize what you said, Irene, because it's not just developers, but you put them at the forefront. Michael, do you see other people, designers, creators, or you think that really when it comes to this part, it should be the developers that push the standards forward?
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. I mean, I guess I wouldn't have thought to split the persona so specifically of like a developer. I think sort of in the context of Ceramic and Web3 generally, I think I would agree in this case with Irene that like in terms of the standards that will facilitate interoperability of a certain type of asset or a certain type of piece of data or other form of information, it does feel like those that are closest to the products they're building are closest to like the use cases that need to be defined. And so in the case of Ceramic, you know, we achieve interoperability of non-financial assets or attributes, right? So you could think of things like profiles or tweets or comments or likes. And so, you know, forming not financial protocols like or asset protocols like might exist on blockchains, but more like data protocols that facilitate data exchange and interop between different services or apps. And so for us, interoperability standards are based on schemas, right? So it's like, can 2 applications structure the same data schema? And that allows their 2 systems to sort of interoperate. And so for us, the atomic unit of composability or interoperability is the schema. And I think the equivalent to a schema in like traditional blockchain land are these like ERCs or like omni-chain standards that define, you know, fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, like smart contract protocols.
I think where Michael and I align based off of our experiences building these 2 different protocols is also that our end users are developers, and who's inheriting these standards and building with them? Developers, not end users. End users are there to enjoy the abstracted experience. And I also think that with these different standards, they should be very much informed by user research. And it's something that I want to see more of in our entire space. It's a best practice of Web2 software development. You should interview users, actually have empathy for their perspective on engaging with your product. And I think across many of the orgs I've engaged with in our industry, it still isn't a necessary component of building product within crypto. Or treated like a necessary component, but it should be.
No, that's a great point when it comes to kind of user experience. And I want to have both of your take on this. Like, there's a great KPI actually more from Web2, which is a customer effort score, and NPS, which is net promoter score. And basically what it is at its core is, would you recommend it to your friends and family? And how easy is it to use? And when you look at the Web3 ecosystem, generally speaking, there are a lot of products or protocols that are the number one and that everyone is using. But there's a big distinction between they're number one for the right reasons, right? Like, would you recommend this specific protocol or this way to preserve your keys, right? So when it comes to kind of user experience, and I want to bring it back to interoperability and identity, but how do you think we can push the conversation forward and push the standards, but at the same time, make them accessible to the general public? Or maybe they should not be, at least on this part. Maybe it's something very technical, and then we can simplify it later. But first, we need to define them.
There was a question that you had sent us beforehand, or a quote, which is "Fun is the killer feature," and the question is like, when you're building infrastructure, is fun needed? And it reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend recently about the process of Michelangelo building David. I studied a bit of art history and art philosophy in university. And one thing I was very fixated on through studying Michelangelo's process was that he built David by removing the ugly, not by pursuing beauty. And the result was David. And I think how you achieve fun and delight is by, at least from our perspective, or our contribution is building infrastructure that abstracts away complexity so that fun can exist. I come originally from a consumer background. I studied computer science and joined Layer Zero originally as an engineer. But when you're building consumer products, it's all about delighting the end user. And the most delightful products I've ever used were actually just fully abstracted experiences that were quite elegant. And I think from a product perspective of it more as what was removed, not what was added.
Michael, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I love that. I also sort of agree that in developer tooling, like it does feel that the more you try to do to it or the more you try to add to it, the less effective it is. And so it is sort of like, I think art and delight or fun by the removal of like impediments and just like, let me do the thing I want to do with as little friction as possible. I feel like we have the opportunity though to Web3 specifically, like when I think of the ethos of Web3 and like what attracts people to the space, let's call it, and I would say one of the things that most commonly comes up is community, right? Like I think at the end of the day, it fundamentally like is more fun to build stuff online in the open with your friends on the internet than it is to like build stuff at home, like alone, in a silo. And I think intrinsically, like the properties of the platforms that we're building, like interoperability, open identity, composability, and what that unlocks and that allows devs to like work together and build products that complement one another and like play off of one another. It's like I think the act of doing that in and of itself is fun and collaborative. And so to the extent we can play those experiences up as well, I think we'd be doing ourselves a service.
Yeah, I think the experimentation piece is very unique to our industry, and I want to see more radical experimentation. I I have been spending a lot of time in the gaming space, and what I often say is by building a game on chain, you are inherently introducing 10x friction. All these things that have to be abstracted away. So to be a little bit more tactical regarding what I was saying before, the kinds of things that should be abstracted away, and we built Layer Zero to help abstract away, are things like needing multiple gas tokens, multiple clicks, multiple wallets, all the steps that typically lead to churn. If you have to go to a centralized exchange to get 3 different gas tokens to then engage with some sort of application that touches 3 different chains, at that point, it's like 30 minutes and you have multiple tabs open and you're going to go do something else. You've churned from that product. You haven't actually accessed the value that you wanted to. And maybe that value is something fun. Maybe it was value transfer, like money between different chains. And I think that is tactically what needs to be abstracted away. And to your Michael, your point around contributing together, it reminds me of this really awesome protocol that just announced their funding round, which is called Story Protocol, and they're essentially building GitHub for fan fiction to begin with. So like building IP in an open source environment, and contributions are all on chain, and like writing a story using this another person's IP is like a pull request. I heard about this recently and spoke with their team in Singapore and was just so excited. And it was really generative for me because it made me think about why I fell in love with consumer years ago to begin with, as some kid that played Neopets and was building.
I was going to mention that one. No, perfect, Irene. Maybe Michael, if you want to, bounce back on this also, because the next question was kind of the different ideas that you're excited about when it comes to identity interoperability, but just overall in the space. Irene started giving elements of an answer with story protocol. Maybe Michael, when it comes to ceramic and the topic of identity, like what are the things that you're excited about? And also just when you look at the general space also, as Irene just did, like what are you looking forward to? What do you think still needs to be built in general?
So starting with your last question, I think what needs to be built is still quite endless. I mean, I think in like the journey of where we are in Web3, there's still more ahead of us than there is behind us. So I think, when I think about the types of things that I'm really excited for right now in the space in terms of identity and interoperability, it's really, I think we're still in the territory of like net new functionalities being delivered. Like often internally at 3Box Labs and in Ceramic, when we're debating like pursuing a new feature or looking at a new integration or thinking about like extending the platform or the protocol in a new way, we always think about like, is this going to enable people to like truly build things that they weren't able to before? Like, is this a net new primitive to introduce to the world? And I still feel like in Web3, like you can't convince me that the current primitives we have like are the ones that will define our industry for the next decade. And so I'm still in pursuit of those. I think there's still big swings to be taken in terms of like decentralizing things besides money. So I'm interested in all of those explorations. Like, I've been hearing about a lot of like industry or vertical specific like data protocols. Like, what is the music sharing or music exchange data exchange protocol for music applications and websites? Or like, what is the social data protocol, or what is the data protocol that unifies like DAOs, right? So I think like these sort of like vertical industry specific data protocols seems to be like the new trend, and I'm interested in seeing our community integrate those with like on-chain primitives. So like, can you integrate like this vibrant data economy where you have all this social data, music data, like event data, user reputation and activity data? And can you integrate that with like EVM-based systems or smart contract-based systems where you can do something like charge a user a certain amount of a fee to make a post? Because even though it's financializing data apps in a new way, and I think that will unlock new business models that sort of can give rise to new industry ecosystems like ERC20 did for fungible tokens in DeFi, and like ERC 721 did for NFTs. I still think there's certain core primitives to be discovered.
And also, Michael, what would be your take? Because we mentioned identity interoperability, but I think one very important concept is also reputation. When you look at the potential of new protocols, and generally speaking, is you look at creators in the space or musicians or even developers, and it seems kind of crazy today that we're locked in silos, right? You use Twitter or you use TikTok, and when it comes to reputation, there's, even in the hackathon, you have Orbis, you have Disco, a lot of projects are exploring this concept of taking your reputation somewhere else. So I'm kind of wondering, what is both your take when it comes to making that reputation potentially interoperable? Is that even possible? Is that more a long-term vision? What is your take on this?
It is possible, but what I think stands like where the challenge lies is in, I think there's a fine line to be walked between creating like making reputation systems, like like granting them meaning beyond the context they were intended to be used. And so like really reputation is a very complex topic. And so like it's kind of nuanced, but when I think about reputation, I think of like, I always ask the follow-up question, like, okay, what are you trying to know? Like, what are you trying to figure out about a user or about someone else? And then like, what question are you trying to answer? And then based on that, we can think about what data you might need to be able to deduce your answer. And so reputation is hard and complicated, but how I do think it relates is that, I think Gitcoin Passport's a really good example of someone that is a data provider. So Gitcoin obviously verifies your identity and does an anti-Sybil identity check when you participate in their grants round. They have to do that because they have quadratic voting system that's gameable. And so they effectively have this set of data that about users that could be useful to other apps in the ecosystem, apps that need to ask the question, is this a unique user? Right? Gitcoin is like, I have this database of data that says which users are unique or not. And so Gitcoin provides that data to users in the form of Gitcoin passports on Ceramic. And then other third-party apps can consume that Gitcoin passport and be able to answer like, well, Gitcoin said this person is a unique user, so I can assume they are a unique user. And so like, that's one form of interoperable reputation. But I think if you take that concept of just exchanging data about a context of a user, I think you can extend it to a lot of different dimensions, which are like particularly relevant given like current regulatory environment in the United States, for example.
Yeah, definitely great points. Irene, I don't know if you wanted to bounce back or if that was good for you, or if you had a couple points with regards to Layer Zero's kind of thesis and approach.
Yeah, our angle on interoperable identity and reputation projects is that it should certainly be interoperable across all networks. I mean, now we have this proliferation of L2s and alt layer 1s, and then of course Ethereum mainnet. If you're building an identity protocol or decentralized identity product, it needs to be able to aggregate data from across all of these different networks. And it also needs to be very seamlessly portable across these. There shouldn't be a clunky bridging experience, for example. You can sync state just by sending packets of information across chains. And so, a dream project I'd love to see someone do on-chain attribution across different chains. Mochaverse is the marquee project of Animoca Brands, and Animoca Brands is this massive portfolio of games and culture projects, and they're setting out to build something called the Mocha ID, and they'll be using Layer Zero to enable this across every single chain that each of their projects are built on, because some of the games in the portfolio are built on Polygon, and some are NFT collections on Solana, and there needs to be a way for those that are just engaging in the entire portfolio of brands they have to carry with them the experiences, the accomplishments, the just involvement across all of these different projects with them. So the protocol level interoperability is what we're really excited about.
Perfect. Kind of on this note of, we talked a lot about the pros of interoperability, but going back to more a general scope with regards to the space, I wanted to have your take on a recent quote from David Phelps, co-founder of Joke Race, which is, "The bull thesis for crypto is also what's terrifying about it. Money is our new ideology." And I know you're both builders and your projects really kind of like emphasize the power of infrastructure. But what is your take really on, money being or do you think so, that money is kind of at the center of everything when it comes to crypto? And is that really what is going to lead the next bull run, or are you more focused on what's in kind of the back end?
I can quickly chime in here. The origination story of Layer Zero was, our three founders realizing that they needed a bridge to build this game that they wanted to create between Ethereum and BNB. They diligenced existing bridges and realized they wouldn't trust any of them from a security perspective. And so they set out to build one themselves. And as they were building it, they realized, oh, bridging tokens is just one specific case of generic messaging. What's much more interesting is the layer below it, the generic messaging primitive. And then we built Layer Zero, the protocol, and on top of Layer Zero, you can build bridges. And so value transfer is just one specific case of this incredibly powerful way of sending information from disparate systems. So I think, money, particularly stablecoins, for example, are a product that has a certain degree of product market fit. I often say that stablecoins are the real world asset or like the primary example of a real world asset that has product market fit. But I think that there are far more interesting applications of blockchain technology beyond just cryptocurrency. That being said, I do think a lot of the initial talent that has come into the space has come in because of fascination and speculation around the really rapid wealth accumulation that is possible with crypto. But my hope is that over the next few waves, we will bring in more engineering talent that is not purely driven by rapid wealth accumulation, and it perhaps is more driven by pure curiosity. And there is a lot of this energy in our space right now, but some of the best engineers I know have yet to even experiment with smart contract engineering, and that makes me really hopeful for the future.
Michael, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. No, it was mainly in terms of there was a recent tweet from David Phelps, which was the bull thesis for crypto is also what's terrifying about it. Money is our new ideology. And so, as I mentioned, you're both builders of Ceramic and Layer Zero, but what is your take with regards to money being at the center potentially, at least of the current discussions, and how can we go beyond that, or will we always stay in that situation and build around?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take part responsibility for that, right? I think that is the situation that we are in, but it doesn't have to be the situation that we continue to be in. I think, like, in the absence of a proliferation of non-financial use cases of blockchain, like, we find ourselves with that statement being true. Like, ultimately, for the last decade or more, it has been largely focused around, waves, focused around money or assets in different forms. We haven't seen a large crypto bull market or adoption wave being driven by something other than finance. And so I'm fully in belief that those use cases exist, as I've said before, but I think we have to build them. And so for every new developer coming in, I think making the tools and the systems and the networks easier to use to build these sorts of new applications and protocols makes me hopeful that we won't just continue to see the same types of apps that we've been seeing for the last 5 to 10 years.
I just had Michael, I just had a last question, kind of a recap of previous panels that we've had and kind of one of the conclusions. And I'd be curious to have your take, which is how do you kind of see the unfolding of, and I put this in quotes, the last social network, which essentially would be kind of an identity-centric network where like ownership is at the user level and interactions are owned by the users. So for example, interaction histories. Do you think that there's a way to go outside of like users being locked into platforms? So I'm thinking about Twitter, but it could really be anything, Twitter, Instagram, or just in Web3 being locked in. We discussed interoperability, but what's your take in terms of the timeline?
Yeah, I think we're pretty close to that. I think, really when, there are protocols live that are doing things like this. I mean, if you look at Lens or Farcaster, like those are social apps where data does live in some sense publicly.
But I mean, sorry to cut you, Michael, but I meant more like at a global scale, like even going outside of Web3, right? Like, because the end goal, first of all, is to kind of remove the term Web3 and really just, this is the way it is, right? So of course, there's great examples that you mentioned, and I won't to point the finger at them necessarily, but there's still a lot to do for everyone, right? So how do we go beyond that so that, those that enjoy Twitter and are not aware, for example, of Lens and Farcaster, like how can they discover this? How can they explore the technology? How can it improve? So it's not an easy question, but how do you see this kind of playing out?
I think since you asked from the perspective of end users, I think, if end users are participating in this sort of open social network, I think developers should, build the apps that help them discover or make use of all the tools in the system. When I do think ultimately, like, I wouldn't call what you defined as the last social network. To me, I think of that as like, I don't want to call it like the last identity system or something, right? But ultimately, what you're defining is a system where users have agency over their identities, which are portable across systems, and data can be queried across different applications, sort of like according to set standards, which I think is a lot of what we just basically talked about for the last 45 minutes. So I would say like a social network to me is an implementation of that kind of a system. It's like one subset of the data universe that might exist in this. And so I think it's much bigger than social. It's sort of like a freeing of data, sort of a universal routing, discovery and routing protocol for information. But you know, I think there's a lot of different pieces that have to come together. I think the key piece where we can start is just aligning on some useful schemas and sharing them. I think like that's step one, and then from there we can build up.
If I can add one thought here, I think social media users care far less about decentralization and privacy than we think or than we sort of espouse in our space. And I'm glad that you brought back the ideal that we get to a state where it isn't a Web3 social product. It's just social products that everyone uses, and it leverages decentralized standards, for example, to like better achieve those things. Users care less about decentralization and privacy than we think, but users do care about content creation. They do care about accumulating capital, social capital, financial capital, and on-chain primitives can help actually create more optimized user experiences for these preferences or for these experiences that do matter. And so I'm excited to see either household name social applications experimenting with on-chain primitives to better curate content or to better help users accumulate capital of multiple kinds, or for the lenses and forecasters of the world to present to larger platforms how they can enable them to do this better, rather than putting forth the value proposition of decentralization and privacy, which of course we care a lot about. But the empathy, like we said at the start of our conversation, for most users needs to drive where resources and innovation lie.
And having the Neopets of Web3, we're getting there. Maybe if you have any final thoughts, recommendations, just in terms also of like the short-term and medium goals of Ceramic and Layer Zero. We already touched on what you're looking forward to personally, but what is exciting for you like on the short term really, and how do you keep also your mind sane with everything going on in Web3, generally speaking? Michael, if you want to go first.
So it is hard to keep my mind sane in Web3, as you mentioned, but I do, you know, I do look forward to all of the sort of Web3 reputation and identity integrations beginning to go live on Ceramic that have been built and that we've been working on for the last bit of while. I mentioned Gitcoin Passport before, but I feel like reputation and Web3 is about to have a big moment. There's a lot of different teams building interesting things. And so I'm most looking forward to sort of the evolution of that use case into something a bit more mature than we've seen it in the past.
Irene, closing
For
words?
Layer Zero, there were a few really major announcements over the last few weeks, but looking ahead, I check our metabase every morning, and there are 20,000 contracts on testnet. So you could say several thousand unique applications that have integrated Layer Zero and 13,000 on mainnet. So what this means, and these are largely consumer applications, is that over the next 12 to 18 months, there will be net new and also established projects that are launching omni-chain or expanding to new chains, and doing so in a way that abstracts away needing multiple gas tokens, which is our gas abstraction feature, or under the hood, using these multiple chains, almost like different programming languages or microservices, and delivering an end experience that is just an application or just a dApp. So that's really, really exciting for me. I think a shout out on our end is we launched most recently on Zora, and I am a huge fan of what that team is doing for creators and also just like tastemakers, artists. And I think that they are a team to watch. And then also at KBW, we teased a big product collaboration with Magic Eden that will be coming out soon. So there's just a lot on the consumer side to be excited about, and plenty of things to play test with consumer is certainly not dead in our space and beyond.
Awesome. Michael, final thoughts, or you're good?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Michael and Irene, for joining today's discussion. And of course, it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, right? And it'll be interesting to see how the next year kind of evolves. And maybe in a year, we'll look back at this conversation and it'll be like, well, this is still going on, or we'll be like, this is long gone, and now we're happy where we are. So thank you so much once again. And of course, go check out, I mean, you probably are aware of it already, but go check out Layer Zero and Ceramic and what they're building, their documentations if you're a developer. If you're a creator, just curious about what they're building, then really just go check them out. And thank you so much once again, Irene and Michael.
Thank you.